Hello and welcome. This channel created to explain some common features and dynamics of the narcissistic personality disorder and engagement or relationships between narcissistic and empathic individuals. Narcissist and empath relationships Part 1. Love bombing, honeymoon phase. Narcissistic and empathic individuals being drawn into relationship often because specific background. The reason for that, explained in my previous videos. Here I focus to give generally applicable description for educational purposes. Please note, different type of pathological narcissism known and diagnosed. On the other hand, there are numerous personality disorders which aren't clinically diagnosed pathological NPD, but the symptoms are highly identical. Also, certain spectrums of these disorders overlap, which makes the diagnosis even more difficult. Not a single person have right to armchair diagnose, only professionals or experts with routine and experience. This material based on my own personal experience, my study of the subject, and various inputs from diagnosed individuals, whom confirmed and helps to identify some behavior in different spectrum of pathological narcissism. The dynamics between empath and narcissist will be based on both current level of cognitive functioning, the spectrum of the traits and characteristics, life experience and the position, hierarchy in life, in all regards. The first phase of the narcissistic relationship dynamics is the love bombing, or otherwise known as honeymoon phase. In this phase the narcissist, but as well the other party, experience the process called idealization. Opposed to the common belief, the narcissist in the majority of cases goes through this phase unaware, or subconsciously. It's not fabricated, but rather the result of the self-reflection and mirroring coupled to the emergence of self-validation and corresponding chemical imbalances. The narcissist experience this phase as euphoric, and reaches the stage of obsession very fast, for numerous reasons. In situation where the narcissist engage with codependent, they both idealize, but their object of idealization is different. There is two associated underlying mechanisms, which corresponding. 1. Mirroring, projection. In the idealization phase the narcissist's self-worth, and identity, is enhanced throughout the partner mirroring. Mirroring in itself, is perfectly normal and fundamental phenomenon in human cognitive behavior. The problem in case of narcissistic mirroring, psychologically, the narcissist justify the validation of their own persona completely, as it depending on the level of calculated or expected feedback, and not the actual real feedback of the other person. It means the internal self-image, and the incoming input is conflicting. This is very important, because it explains that, the very same underlying mechanism, causes the exact opposite tendency as well, such as devaluation. Pathological narcissists always project. I spoke about this in my previous videos, as it's the acting outward upon input, no self-processing takes place but immediate denial. Incapable to own its own feelings, therefore lack in the responsibility of the self, but rather project all responsibility away, back to the environment. As any negative feeling associated or caused by other parties, always trigger certain level of stress, and with that the narcissist's self-defense mechanism has been triggered. Consequently, will respond either passive-aggressive, or simply aggressive way against the source of stress, with immediate momentary devaluation taking place. The idealization and devaluation therefore the consequence of the same core functionality of the persona. The only difference is how the narcissist feel themselves upon the feedback. What they invalidate, is the fact, as the partner actual behavior as well a response to the narcissist behavior. Essentially, it will create a constant feedback loop, where the narcissist reject their own responsibility, only validate the input process, without monitoring their own feedback to the environment as output. Importantly, sometimes, narcissists can recognize this process and the mirroring, and reinforce the self-monitoring due negative inputs from the environment. Good example is the high-functioning psychopath and sociopath. On the other end of the spectrum, the high-functioning empath has the same self-regulation process. In other words, by experiencing injury, or struggling situations, it reinforces higher level of self-awareness, to recognize the consequences and outcomes, and unable to bypass or deny the narcissist's causal role in the outcome. In this state, the narcissist the most vulnerable, and lack of potential output source to engage. When this higher awareness occurs, the narcissist will consciously regulate this process in some extent. When the denial of responsibility confronted by facts will cause cognitive dissonance, and the narcissist will collapse into agony and depression. These points are crucial stepstones how the cognitive functioning will develop. It can create evolution towards higher cognitive functioning purely driven by adaptation. This as well will determine the position on the narcissistic spectrum. To understand easier, for a narcissist fundamentally crucial factor, how they are perceived, or what the environment judgment about them. This urge can make great impact in the capacity of their evolution, towards this higher functioning. Consequently, some will be able to actually fit in better, and can easier accept social norms, and consider as it was their own moral code, which causes a positive feedback to self-validation. While others turn more covert, or antisocial etc. What you have to understand is that, the narcissistic idealized partner must satisfy their expected role. In case that fails, it results in instant devaluation. Devaluation is usually momentary, associated with the external input of feedback of the self-image, or the narcissist's expectations hasn't been met, or satisfied in certain moments in time. The partner always the narcissist's own extension, therefore no clear distinction between you and I. Hence the partner will be always under various tactics, to keep the facade, depends on the momentary environmental circumstances and the narcissist's priorities, hence any failure of the partner, or not accordingly act upon spoken, or unspoken expectations, inherit the definition of betrayal. This is why, the devaluation is inevitable, and to fulfill the narcissist's needs, always will be impossible mission. This related to the second mechanism. 2. Objective constancy, objective identification, splitting. Objective constancy, and splitting, is the result of underdeveloped pathology. This is important, because it's a major difference between the individual, whom simply narcissistic, or the individual actually pathologically hardwired. Even very early on, in the idealization phase, the narcissist try to gain control, by testing the partner in various ways. This process entirely depends on the narcissist's level of cognitive functioning. Again, this tests, and boundary violations, are not conscious on the lower and mid-range spectrum, because there isn't enough self-awareness over their own pathology. This is why, the partner remain unaware of what they are dealing with. Empath, and codependent, usually translate this tests, as the narcissist just insecure, defensive, for various reasons, and as well their ego stimulated due incoming input of increased self-worth and validation by the narcissist. This is the first step, where the entire process set up the following vicious cycles. These boundary violations are controlling and jealous micromanagement, where the narcissist will try to control whereabout, and accessibility of the partner, and deploy threat of abandonment, upon the codependent or empath fail the criteria. Most importantly, this test has two major consequences. 1. The narcissist actually gain control, and inflate its ego, which trigger obsession in the early stage, as urge to control, and to reinforce superiority. 2. will deploy the abandonment tactic, at any later point in time, upon any further failed criteria. We can call this as conditioning. From this point, low-functioning empath and codependent will adopt to the narcissist manipulation tactics, because the incoming input of increased self-worth makes the narcissist unique match, and they see as the narcissist has high loyalty and commitment factor, and as well maintain constant self-validation, which both the codependent and the narcissist feel satisfied with. Hence this, very early on, both see a potential partner with high compatibility. Empath with high cognitive functioning does not seek any self-validation, because the internal agent always in sync with the strong internal moral code, and the constant environmental feedback always justify the moral criteria. Instead, after certain time, age, and experience, the high-functioning empath rather reject constant validation. The self-identity and moral code becomes rock solid, and rather rigid in a sense, similar to the psychopathic spectrum where the external inputs does not regularly trigger any self-defense mechanism. This means the capacity of dealing with environmental stress is very high. Accordingly, the self-defense trigger is very low. It makes the individual steady and stable. This process also keeps the empath to self-regulate, and switch on and off the empathic and narcissistic traits at any moment in time. For this reason, high-functioning empath does not allow micromanagement. It does not necessarily going into conflict, as still, with this problem present, it finds the narcissist as valuable, but rather weak, especially, if the narcissist female, it's understood as feminine attribute, and tend to dim, overlook, or ignore the manipulative tendencies as long as the situation not escalate into more toxicity. In regards to functioning, the low and mid-level empath engagement with a narcissist, and the emergency of the dynamics is very predetermined and conclusive. This group in both spectrum perfectly satisfy each other's needs. Even the relationship is extremely toxic and abusive, the self-validating criteria are always met and satisfied. Accordingly, the low-functioning empath or codependent will victimize themselves, while subconsciously they will more and more depend on the narcissist projection, and so on the validation. See the Karpman drama triangle: the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor for basic general social model. The empath with higher cognitive functioning is completely different scenario, and it can be extremely dangerous. Switching between the empathic and narcissistic traits, capable to turn the roles completely opposite. It means, it can force the narcissist into submission, and constantly traumatized, to reinforce cooperation, while the empathic nature completely overtaken by narcissistic traits and will switch to the role of the narcissist with full awareness. By doing so, it can cause various effect, and complete change in the relationship. I will explain this later in detail, as it is very complex dynamics and involves many factors and criteria and deep psychology. Essentially, I believe, high-functioning empath can cause more targeted and intentional harm than a sociopath or psychopath. High-functioning empath in relationship with high-functioning narcissist is very unique case, and highly stimulating in most areas. Although, the toxicity will present, due the fact as they will constantly challenge each other, in the same time tremendous teacher of one another. The sexual life as well high quality, extremely passionate, and high level of intimacy consistent. Although, these two don't need each other. In the same time the attraction, and compatibility factors are very high, as they perfect mirrors of each other. And the femininity and masculinity always naturally balanced. They can be actually committed and loyal, even stay in long-term relationship. On the other hand, the mind games and the power games continuously ongoing, switching between excitement, stimulating, and toxicity. This type of relationship is very intense and exhausting in the same time, and the dynamics correspondingly varies. Next time, I will go into details of this particular group, and the dynamics, the manipulative tactics, and the very structure of such relationship. Thanks for watching. Please feel free to subscribe, or follow the future materials.